Дорогие друзья, меня слышно? Спасибо большое, что вы собрались сегодня здесь, в Имагуру. Мы почти приближаемся к середине Всемирной недели предпринимательства. Сегодня среда, и сегодня очень интересный день, очень интересная конференция, которая называется «Новые рынки». И сегодня мы будем говорить о Европе, о наших отношениях с Европой. И, конечно, для меня большая честь модерировать такую интересную и необычную дискуссию для бизнес-конференции. Сегодня у нас с нами посол Великобритании в Республике Беларусь Брюс Бакнелл, посол Германии в Республике Беларусь Питер Детмар и посол Эстонии в Республике Беларусь Майт Мартинсон. Уважаемые друзья, коллеги, небольшой комментарий технический. Я думаю, что мы будем говорить, я буду говорить и на русском, и на английском языке. Мои собеседники, уважаемые гости, будут говорить на английском языке. Пожалуйста, возьмите гарнитуру, все те, кому она нужна, гарнитура, которая позволит вам слышать перевод. С нами работает сегодня команда переводчиков, поэтому у нас будет обеспечен синхронный перевод. Пожалуйста, если это вам нужно, сделайте это, если кто-то еще не сделал. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So, пожалуйста, можно? Bruce, do you need one? Mart? No? Okay, we need to... So it's a great privilege to moderate such an unusual discussion for a business forum. I would call it ambassador's talk. I was thinking about today's topic, and I was thinking what European Union means to Belarus, to Belarusian. And despite our geographical proximity, despite we are neighbors, we can say European market, Europe, is still a new market for Belarusians. And why? I was thinking why. It's not just because of the border. In my opinion, there are many reasons. Historical experiences, mentality gaps, cultural gaps, most probably gaps in values. So I would like to help today bridge a little bit all of those gaps. And my first question to you would be about Belarus. Are we living in times of change? I know, Bruce, you've been here for 4 years. Ambassador Detmar just arrived here. Do you see any changes?
Thank you very much. Dobre ranice. I'm going to challenge you at the start. Europe is not a new market for you. You are a supplier, quite a big supplier, of what we always think of as nefti produkti to Europe, and have been for some time. So it's not a new market for some things. Sorry, I'm going to be difficult today.
It's not for us, it's for Russia.
Yeah, but you refine it.
Yeah, true.
There is value added in refining crude oil. So it's not necessarily such a new market. That's the first thing I would say. Secondly, a change over the period I've been here. I've been here 3.5 years, but even so. And Peter, my dear colleague, has actually been here until 2013, and then loved it so much he's come back. And I would say that I think there's sort of 2 or 3 changes. I mean, first of all, in terms of, as you know, I'm a great champion of the English language as a skill for business. It is so important because unfortunately for the rest of the world, fortunately for my country, English is the medium of exchange. And in fact, I feel there's more English being spoken in Minsk now than there was when I first arrived. Whether that's because I'm always ready to talk to lots of people, I don't know. But there is a sense of an opening. I would say in my 3 years, one of the great success stories of Belarus, the high-tech park, the IT sphere, is developing apace and is growing year on year, but it's a relatively small part of the economy. You have to be realistic about it. It's not going to fill the gap from state enterprises. And I suppose the final thought about changes in my time, I would say obviously there's been quite a big geopolitical change in the region, which has provided some opportunities but also some threats. But the basic essence of it is the macroeconomics, the decline of the Russian market, the fall in the oil price, perhaps above all, of course, because given that Belarus is partly a petro economy, have had a major impact. And that, I think, is the opportunity is to actually change, restructure, modernize, whatever word you want to use, state enterprises, to take advantage of, to actually out of difficulty, look for the future. Don't live day to day. And that's, I think, the main thing that I would like to see in the next years, because there is great potential here. But you need to, and at the end of the day, in the global economy, you need to make things or provide services that people will buy.
Thank you. Good morning. I actually don't have much to add what Bruce told you. The only major thing I would identify as a change is that in the period when I was here for the first time between 2009 and 2013, the European market was not in the focus of Belarusian enterprises, because it was in the so-called good old times where the Russian market was taking over most of, and the Eastern European markets were taking over most of the products produced and here in Belarus. Now, as the situation has changed to quite an extent, the necessity to diversify market for Belarusian products forces Belarus more to focus also on to the European market, where they are not present as prominent as they could be, beyond what Bruce said about oil products or natural resources you exported to Europe, but not the bulk of the Belarusian industry never turned to the European market, and now they are in a difficult situation, economic situation, and now they have to diversify, and one of the markets which might be promising is the European market. But if the Belarusian industry is already ready for the European market, we will discuss, I think, later. But this, when you talk about times of change, this, to my mind, would be the biggest difference between the period I was here in the first place and today.
Thank you, Ambassador. Mart, how long have you been here? Do you see any changes?
Шановні Сябра, good morning. I have been to Belarus now a bit more than a year. I arrived in August 2014. Before that, I visited the place the only time at the end of 1999. Do I see changes? Of course. The biggest gap what one has to conquer, I would say, is the mental gap, the mental distance. If I take my own country, and I suppose this is true also about the other European nations, physically, Belarus is Europe. It is so close. It's much closer from here to Berlin than from my own country. So I think the changes we talk about now, the identity, branding of a country, because what I have noticed, people talking now, if your country is known, if your nation is known, well-known brand supports your product, supports the service you provide, but if there is no such a visible support, you as a service provider or a producer of a product, if you are ashamed of linking the, let's say, the image of your country to your product, you see disadvantage. Therefore, if you come from, I suppose, Britain, Germany, Denmark, people know, yes, that's a quality, a good service. I suppose with Belarus, you still need to physically get to people who are your potential customers, and at the same time, if you invite people to Belarus, I have been told, people say, is it safe to come to have a meeting in Minsk? So you see, those are the difficult to measure, but imaginary things, and we are in place what's called Dimaguru. So let's imagine how to find ways out from those situations. Regarding my own country, it's always what you can do to change, not to be fixed on why it's not possible. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree with Ambassador Detmer that more and more Belarusian entrepreneurs have interest in European markets, and for different reasons. Some people want to expand their business to Europe. Some entrepreneurs want to simply relocate. Some people want to start up, for example, in Estonia. When it comes to oil business and refining business, I would call it more or less state business. I'm recalling Mr. Rudy on day before yesterday. He mentioned that our state is the largest entrepreneur, or is it entrepreneur number one, and that's we can't disagree. So, but to me, a big sign of this year that more and more private sector entrepreneurs would like to expand to European markets. Should they be aware of a wider picture of Belarus-EU relationships? I mean, political, social, cultural. Can they influence, or can the situation influence, help, or encourage them to start business in Europe? Okay.
Well, absolutely, for sure. But in the first place, I would suggest that before coming to the European market, there is one quite important factor you should always take into account. This is what we call, in general, the intercultural competence. When you go to a new market you don't know, you first have to acquaint yourself with the market conditions and with the people you want to get engaged with. So, take for example in Germany, we do have a lot of institutions who teach entrepreneurs to learn more about the market they want to engage in, which is quite an important first step before even thinking about engaging, because you should know the people, you should know the market, you should know the culture of the country. I would ever advise somebody from Germany to come to Belarus first to learn about the country, to learn about the market. So this is the first step you always should do. There is a lot of potential, and I would also agree to what Maid said, that in our globalized world, it's not only the product that counts you want to sell. It's also the branding of the country. I mean, we can like it or not. Fact is that if you have a good country branding, the products you want to sell become much easier popular on a new market than vice versa. Even if you have a good product to sell, if the branding of your country is not as positive as it could be or should be, then marketing becomes much more difficult than vice versa. So there are two components I want to stress. First is branding of the country in relation to branding of the product, and then secondly, the intercultural competence, which at least is a crucial basis for any kind of business you want to start in an so far not noticed or insufficient noticed new market.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. When it comes to negative image, country image, how entrepreneurs can overcome it? You know, at least now, I feel like when I am in Europe and I say, and people understand I speak Russian, at least I'm not Russian, so I'm not from Russia. It's to say I'm from Belarus sounds kind of a bit better than that I'm from Russia, but still, how I can overcome it as a physical person, as an individual, as entrepreneur.
Well, perhaps a step back. When I discuss Belarusian affairs in Germany, most of the people I meet are asking me, Belarus, part of Russia? They have not the slightest idea about Belarus. So the problem starts at the beginning, to make Belarus as a country more known abroad. There is a big gap between the consciousness of your side producing and trying to sell products or services to different markets and the perception of the market you want to enter. If the country in itself is not very well known because there is no, let's say, PR work done for the country for different reasons, because you lack the adequate institutions in your country to do that work, then it is getting very difficult to make yourself known. It has nothing to do in the first place with good or bad image, but have an image at all. And if people don't know to whom they are going to negotiate or to make business with, it becomes very difficult. So the first thing should be make your country more known abroad. And then everything else in the due time will follow. So I'm not talking once again about good or bad image, but image at all.
Thank you.
I agree up to a point. I'm sorry, Peter, but I think the important point is that it's that first contact. I think it's the very first step. That's the first moment. You've got to make an impact from the start. And might is a representative of a country with much the same length of independent history, give or take, for a few years between 1920 and 1939, I know. But the image, the effect, the power of what Estonia has done is really striking, largely because they do these things like the e-government initiative, which we've heard all about this week. But that is actually fantastic because it's new, it's exciting, and it's a real sort of lightning rod for attention. Conversely, I'm very struck by how many companies want to put London on their material, and some of the products may never even touch the shores or never see the water of the Thames River. So there are great advantages for my country. But I think it's the first step. I think what you've got to do is, I wouldn't get so hung up about the country. I get really hung up, I would really push. You have a good product or a good service and sell hard, and I mean hard. You've got to live your brand. And dare I say, you have to be a little bit more Russian and a little bit more assertive about your brands. And I think that to get over that first barrier, once you're over the first barrier, once you've got the attention, that's the trick, because the competition out there is really fierce in Europe as well. I think that's a point to be made. It's really fierce. But once you've got attention, once you're in there, then you can live on the quality and value of your brand, your product, your service, whatever it is. But it's getting there over the first step.
Yeah, thank you, Bruce. I totally agree. Estonian example is an absolutely great example of a country which could build a great image out of, for example, Skype success. The whole innovative nation, startup nation. Why we couldn't do it out of, for example, Viber success? A very similar story, but no one knows Viber is from Belarus. Everyone knows Skype is Estonian. I do, actually I do.
Okay. Thank you. As you see, I try to get, it's good to hear so many good, sweet words about your own country. But as you see, Peter and Bruce, they don't have to dance so much, because you represent Germany, you represent something what is great, right? Great Britain, London, what else could you say? So in case of Estonia, yes, you should outsmart others. It's not enough to compete with those who are next to you. You have to raise the blank higher. So for us, we always aim to beat Finns, Swedes, Scandinavians. It's not always sweet, because they are bloody high up in global rankings. So to explain it to ordinary fellows, our own countrymen, why after 20 or 25 years we aren't as good as Finns, but they are on global top. So what do we do? What is important to understand, you may think that you have a smart idea, but you fail, and you may fail for the second and third time. Practical experience in a year 2003, when we talk about image and branding, Hong Kong came up with idea of Hong Kong, it takes your breath away. Wonderful. They were ready to launch it at Christmas, I think in 2003, and 2 weeks before the launch, suddenly a disease appeared, SARS. If you recall, the symptoms of SARS were that it takes your breath away and you die, right? So everything what you prepared went down to the toilet. So therefore, is IT enough for Estonia? No. As you see, I have to dance more because I'm representing a smaller country. Estonia is like a wild strawberry. Difficult to find, but if you taste it, oh, you love it. Wild nature, crazy people. You see? So it's, you have to try different angles. The strength of Belarus, heavy industries, but at the same time it could be weakness, like Nokia was a strength and weakness for Finland. So it's not an advice, this is something that, okay, maybe the last thought here, I will remain it for later, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I would like to go a bit back to a wider picture of Belarusi relationships. A month ago, we had presidential elections here in Belarus, and the day after elections, European Union suspended sanctions. So, is it a sign for Belarusian society at large, entrepreneurs, politicians? What does it mean? Yeah, sincerely speaking, I was a bit confused, and I'm pretty sure many people in Belarus got confused too. Okay,
let's try and explain a little better. I mean, It wasn't immediately after the elections.
Yeah, it was absolutely day
No, it was
one
not
after
absolutely
election.
the day after. It was not. The formal decision is actually only followed through at the end of the month. And in fact, those sanctions that existed stayed in force until I think it was actually the 29th or 30th of October, to be precise. The problem is Europe is not America. It's made up of 28 countries, some of whom are not quite sure if they want to be there, which is the burden I bear. But the decisions that were taken, it's a process. It doesn't happen just like that. We're not the Americans. We don't shoot first and ask questions later. We often discuss at great length. And it took about 3 weeks for the actual decision, how are we going to present it to the Belarusian government? I tell you, it does take time. So a few myths that are out there, I would like to dispel. I mean, the first myth is sanctions against Belarus. It's not sanctions against Belarus. It was sanctions against individuals and a few entities. That didn't stop business. I visited a company in Grodno about 2 years ago, setting up a new plant to produce chemicals for the Russian and Belarusian and Ukrainian markets. It did not stop business. It did inhibit business, I take the point. And I've had quite extensive dealings with a financial institution based in Britain who are interested in the Belarusian market, and they will say there is a political risk. That's an extra cost that you will bear if you want to lend money to Belarus or Belarusian institutions. But it's only a very small cost. It's only part of the risk that they have to price things against. So, yes, the reduction of the numbers of people sanctioned has perhaps reduced the political risk, but in absolute terms, it's a tiny percentage. But of course, as I know, being the representative of the country with the City of London, tiny percentages on billions actually makes a lot of money. It's quite a big price. So I appreciate there are differences. And I think what's the other final myth about sanctions, which I've forgotten what I was going to say. It doesn't stop business. There is a small element of price. Sanctions actually are, in terms of the sanctions about Belarus vis-a-vis Russia, they're nothing like the level of sanctions against the Russians. Just talking to our colleagues in the EBRD about the effects of Russian sanctions, the sanctions that have been taken against Russia, on their operations, it's only because their operations in this country, they have so many partners, Russian state banks. It's a particular EBRD aspect. But it's very easy for, dare I say, even British journalists to paint the black and white picture about all of this. It's often the case is you need to look at the detail. And those sanctions were not immediately lifted one day after the elections. The process began when people were released in August. We discussed it. We waited for the elections. We wanted to ensure the elections were as free and fair, or there was a positive movement on the elections. And then there was a decision taken, which was finally implemented at the end of October. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for explanations. We are as Belarusians, as people who live here, we don't see internal processes, internal discussions, which take place between the governments, between authorities. So what is absolutely evident to us is the fact when it's announced, and that's why I mentioned it was done right after elections. Peter, would you like to add something?
In the first place, I want to underline what Bruce said with respect to the effect of sanctions in relation to economic exchange. I mean, I was here when sanctions were declared, and I spent another 2.5 years after the sanctions were declared, and I never heard anything from our German economic community here in Belarus that the sanctions themselves did harm their business. There were other factors who influenced business, but not the sanctions. So what Bruce said is, it has been a clear political signal to the Republic of Belarus that we were not very much satisfied with other factors than the economic factor. The second I would like to underline is that suspending the sanctions is the response of what happened in your country, and it's we try by this to get a new start in political discussion on all kinds of political questions, like human rights, like the law on elections, etc., etc., etc. And we hope that we can have a fruitful dialogue to implement some change. This is an open discussion. Nobody knows where it will end. But anyhow, it's a clear signal from our side that we want to relaunch a dialogue which had not taken place for the last years. So this is the more crucial part of suspending the sanctions right now, not the economic effects.
Thank you. Mart, would you like to add something? Okay, thank you. Yeah, absolutely. You know, when we talk here about not purely business topics, and still it's a topic of interest for business. It's a topic for of interest for entrepreneurs. Do you think business world and political world, there are totally two different worlds and should not impact it or don't impact each other? Should entrepreneurs think of political situation in Belarus, political situation between our countries, European Union, Belarus? Can they impact the situation?
I mean, yes, they can, most definitely. But I think if you're talking to businesses in Britain and the ones who have contact with this market, I mean, first of all, it's the conditions in the country. Can they invest? Will their investments be safe? Do they have full rights of property ownership? Can they repatriate profit? I mean, you don't invest in another country just for the good of the country. You invest in the country for the good of your company. And the competition around the world for investment is incredibly fierce. And inevitably, I think the people that will invest in this country will have some connection probably with Russia, looking at the Russian market, taking advantage of the Eurasian Economic Union, where in theory it will become a space with free movement of goods, services, capital, and so on. And those things really matter. And that's where your business-friendly government will make such a difference, speaking bluntly. You know, this is where everybody wants to have a level playing field. If your country directs credit, sucks capital in the market and pushes it to state enterprises, the private sector is not going to flourish. So you've got to be able to allow a level playing field so that people can compete, not just market, but actually for capital. And I think that's one of the most important elements that we've been suggesting would help Belarus in the long term. If you want to have a strong, independent, thriving economy, you've got to allow businesses to be able to innovate, to grow, and make the decisions that they want to make for the benefit of the business, not necessarily for the benefit of the country.
Just to add what Bruce said, not looking from the outside onto the Belarusian market, but also from the Belarusian market to the outside. I mean, the competition for credits, the competition for support for new businesses in Belarus to enter European markets or different markets are hindered, but in the same way, then vice versa for the Belarusian market. So if you want to have a fair start, you should have enough possibilities to get support from national banks. You should have support from state agencies to support your endeavor to conquer new markets. And if this is less possible for private enterprises in relation to state-owned enterprises, there is a not fair competition between both parts within Belarus, and they don't have the same chances to expand to other markets than the Belarusian market, just because of the fact that state-owned enterprises distort to a large extent a couple of markets, like the labor market, like the capital market, like the market for products. Pardon me? Like the market for services and products. So this is all interconnected. It's not an island. You have to compete, as Bruce said, on new markets with competitors from all over the world, which get support to some extent from their home markets. And if you don't, as private entrepreneurs in Belarus, don't get the same support, you have a less comfortable situation with respect to competitiveness.
Yeah, thank you so much. Mike?
Yes. When we speak about market economy, very often the first point of reference is Adam Smith, a well-known British, Scottish, my excuses. But the point is invisible hand, what guides our needs, supply and demand. But as we know, market is not perfect. With the same token, one could say state is not perfect. If I'm representing the state in very often, let's say, state institutions have a monopoly of doing something, deciding something. If me, you, or somebody else is in bad mood in this monopoly, you see, the result may not be what we expect. So, therefore, the discussion, the interaction between those two is important to get the balance right. Export and import. Export brings us happiness, brings money home, blah, 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 blah. But in order to export, you need to have a good product. How do you get a good product? You need thousands of ingredients in good product. So it means you need import, right? That you get those details, ingredients, the time when you need it. Otherwise, how are you going to make a perfect product what you can sell? So understanding that this is a two-way channel as well, two-way street. Speed of changes. What works for one doesn't work for others. Britain and Germany are different. Estonia and Finland are different. Portugal and France are different. So giving an advice, Belarus is different from Lithuania, from Russia, from Ukraine, Poland. You can talk, but you can't say, do it like this. Look what we have done, think, will it work for you, and find your own solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. European values. Freedom, democracy, rule of law. And to me, the first one, and I think it's really important nowadays, entrepreneurial culture, entrepreneurship, courage to take risk, etc., etc. To what extent we're different? I mean, Belarusian entrepreneur, Belarusian entrepreneurial mentality, how we can bridge the gap between Belarusian entrepreneurs and European entrepreneurs.
a good, complex, and very difficult to answer question. I mean, private entrepreneurs in Belarus don't differ from the rest of the world.
I'm so sorry, just a technical issue.
Okay.
Уважаемые коллеги, сейчас мы попросим нашу техническую команду уточнить момент, связанный с переводом, и мы продолжим. И очень скоро готовьте свои вопросы, мы перейдем к общению с вами. Пожалуйста, готовьте острые вопросы нашим собеседникам. Техническая команда, дайте мне, пожалуйста, знать. Все.
Yeah. We are on?
Yeah, we are on.
Oh, okay. So,
once
again, I don't think that private Belarusian entrepreneurs differ much from private entrepreneurs worldwide. What Bruce said with respect to how they think, how they act, and what's the overall aim of their production of services or goods, I don't think that it differed much. If we talk about state-owned companies, there might be a difference because their socialization in the past still prevails today, and it will ask them a change of mind to some extent, but this has been the same, and we Germans, we have our experience when 25 years back we were confronted with a whole state of more or less bankrupt industry, and we learned a lot about the thinking of directors of state-owned companies in the former GDR. So you need some time also to give them the freedom to act on a business-like management of their company. If they are not responsible for what they're doing, just going beyond to produce the number they have to produce because the plans tell them to do, then there is less hope for a change of mind to get a better understanding of how market works. But this is, as I said, not the case with private Belarusian entrepreneurs. They know exactly how the market are working, and they act on the basis of their knowledge. So I think your question can be answered that way, that I have full confidence in private Belarusian entrepreneurs to have the same mind, to have the same line of action as German private entrepreneurs have.
Thank you. I agree, and at the same time, I have a few comments. You know, we closely work with Belarusian startups, young people, entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, and we organize study tours to Europe. Recently, we visited the largest startup event in Europe, in Finland, called Slush, 40 Belarusian entrepreneurs. So, and many people, you know, European people, European mentors, entrepreneurs, they see the difference, you know, between, let's say, European startups and Belarusian startups. And the difference is, you know, still our even youth, even young people, we are risk adverse. We sometimes we kind of don't have enough courage to even sell our great ideas, to talk to people, and also there are many you know. I think to me many things, cultural aspects, entrepreneurial aspects that we miss here in Belarus. And I think there is something we can teach, we can add, and that's at least what my company is doing here, trying to to promote European entrepreneurship and trying to promote global entrepreneurship culture here in Belarus. So I still see the gap.
Well, nobody is born as a perfect manager. I certainly not. And this is the case also in Germany. So when you look into the system of how things are promoted the way you described, then you will find a hell of a lot of different institutions who have taken up the task of coaching. For example, startups. There is a system of coaching startup entrepreneurs. People, young people students coming up with a good idea, and they want to do business. And they don't know exactly how to do it. So there is a system of coaching them. There is a system of pre-financing them over specialized credits, over venture capital, over crowdfunding. All this has been developing over the last decades, but also in view of that everybody has to learn when he starts doing a business, and coming from university or coming from all kind of other circumstances, then people need support. And this support is delivered in a whole system, as I said, of different institutions in Germany who give a hand to those who want to start a business. So if you could create the same system of support in your country, the difference would vanish in a foreseeable future.
Yeah, thank you so much. So that's something we do, but to me, management and entrepreneurial culture is not totally not the same thing. So I was rather talking about entrepreneurial culture, entrepreneurial attitude, entrepreneurial mentality. Yes, we can coach sales and those important business topic like finance, marketing, etc. But but how to change mind, how to change mentality?
If I can interrupt, I think it does take time. So first of all, if you like, the entrepreneurial spirit in Britain was celebrated by Margaret Thatcher. We went through some pretty tough times, and many in Britain would argue that actually we were probably too radical. We tried to shut down too many businesses, and we needed those nice Japanese to invest in our country. We didn't get enough from Germany, unfortunately. But we needed the nice Japanese to invest in our country, because actually the Japanese were prepared to take a risk. The Japanese did want to invest in Europe, and they looked at Britain and they said, hey, it's a great place, we can run this. And they did. And that's why today our exports and imports of cars are almost in balance. And I see a lot of the cars made in Britain in this country, but they're not called necessarily Jaguar or Land Rover. They're called Honda, Nissan, and Toyota. So it took time, and the entrepreneurial culture in Britain has really benefited from high-tech things like IT, the City of London, the service cultures, the services that we will sell anything to anybody if we can get some money out of it through London. But look at Scotland. Scotland is suffered, and that's partly why, one of the reasons, there's several, but one of the reasons, Scotland hasn't had that same entrepreneurial injection as London, the south of England has. Because mainly it was based on an old economy, and to some extent people weren't prepared to take the risk. And actually that's one of the things that if they did become independent, they probably would learn, and that's taking responsibility for themselves. That's the number one, I think, essence. Entrepreneurs want to do it, and they do it, and they're ready to fail. And that's, I think, really where, to some extent, we've become a little bit more Americanized in the last few years, last 20-odd years. And you do need, but it will take time. I think to underline Peter's point, I think entrepreneurs in this country are not that much different from entrepreneurs in other countries. You will know better. You've been there. You're at the coalface. We're a little bit away. If it may be the case in Finland, you saw the difference. But I can give you examples of Belarusians who are doing great entrepreneurial work, not just in Belarus, but also in my country. And I'm very glad they're in my country. I'm delighted that we have, I won't name them, but they've won, even Belarusians have won competitions. So you need both. I think you need the spirit. Allow people to take responsibility for their businesses. Allow them to fail. And I tell you, over the longer term, a generational change, a generation afterwards, you will find people who will be the next generation who really will have that entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah, thank you so much. Startups today, to me it's a kind of subculture, different culture, entrepreneurial culture. So Estonia is a great country of, is a great example of startup culture. How do you do it? So, how you manage to encourage entrepreneurial spirit, to encourage startups to go global?
Have right people, have self-belief, have good neighbors. The hard lessons of 80s and 90s to our closeness to Scandinavians, it was harsh, but it was very, very educational. Some words were mentioned: gap in expectations, risk averse. I see the gap in different places. Okay, one field could be, you see state factories, huge, producing trucks, tractors. They leaders drive good cars, right? If something breaks down in those Hondas or Land Rovers, you go to the service, you get, and also German cars need some service. So you know how to handle it. At the same time, the products coming out from those factories, led by those people, if you approach them and tell them that, look, if to sell your products in a country I represent, the same sort of services are needed. Otherwise, you cannot compete against the Germans, Brits, or Scandinavians, be it tractors or trucks. And you find a surprise. What you take for granted with your own personal car, you don't apply the same logic to the products what you are producing. So there is a gap. Startups. Gaps also in expectations. Some people say the proof is in the pudding. For every successful startup, I think there are 95 failures, right? Maybe more. We talked about Skype. Those people behind the Skype almost were jailed because initially they came up with some other inventions, one being Kazaa. They were almost jailed by the US authorities. So you see, not everything is as legal or as sellable as you think. Of course, by today, the people who were involved with Skype, some of them have moved on. This year, they were claimed to become the richest in Estonia because now they are behind the TransferWise, what is a service in banking, making sure that British pounds and other currencies transferred into euros or so, but not all the profits will remain in Britain. You see, competition goes on between big and small. High and low tech industries. Initial capital to Estonia were also brought in by low tech forestry. You just cut down the trees and you start, and then you move up lower, step by step from lower to the higher levels. Sometimes I hear people saying, oh, we start the industry here, we cut down trees and we will start producing, let's say, Italian-style furniture. It doesn't work this way, or at least it takes years and years and years. So this is about the startups. Let's see. how many of them will remain, and some are successful, some are not. What is the this is the nature, right? Two people go out, one is lucky on lottery, another is not. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, by the way, some European countries introduce so-called startup visas. And there is a wide discussion in Europe on a potential introduction of European startup visa. What's your opinion about it? And do you think it's a good time to start up in your particular country?
We, of course, are not part of the Schengen system, and I think, unfortunately, I think events in Paris are obviously casting a big cloud over the whole this issue. But aside from that, I hope that the policy isn't driven by one or two awful events as they may have been, because of course the vast majority of people in Europe are actually very law-abiding and don't want to see this sort of thing, including in the Muslim communities. But in Britain we do have tier 1 visas for entrepreneurs and student entrepreneurs even, which we have had for some time now. And one of the myths that I'm constantly dispelling is the fact that it's very difficult to get a British visa. Well, it may be, and apologies about the price. I'm sorry, it's not my decision. But over 95% of all applicants for British visas in Belarus get their visa that they applied for. So it is not at all impossible. It's very probable that if you apply and you follow the rules, you'll get it. And then I think I haven't got, to be fair on that, I haven't got figures on the tier 1s, these visas for entrepreneurs and student entrepreneurs, but I would guess it's pretty much the same. Is it a good time to start up? I haven't the faintest idea, to be perfectly frank, because it'll depend on your business, it'll depend on your the market conditions and so on and so forth. No time seems to be the time to start up. That's the whole point about enterprise. You have to take a risk. If you've got the right product, or you think you've got a good product, or you've got a good service, and you've got a good business that you think can be exploited, go forward. No time is the right time, no time is the wrong time. If you think it's the wrong time, I don't think you're an entrepreneur.
There's not much to add to the last point he said. There is no good or bad times. It depends all on the good idea you got and to put it into reality. But with respect to the first part of the question, we are, the German embassy here is the 4th or 5th largest visa issuing embassy worldwide. So, welcome to Germany, I would say. And those visa rejected are such a small figure that I don't think this matters. Second remark I would like to make is, I want you to make your startup here in Belarus and not in Germany. Welcome to Germany, but it would be better for your country to make a startup here in Belarus and not in Germany. Third remark, we just made it much easier for foreign entrepreneurs to come into Germany. There had been some requirements in the past, but the latest regulation was deregulate this. So there are still a couple of examinations to follow by different institutions, but we don't have any kind of requirements with respect to capital and people you want to hire in for your business. So you can go to Germany and make a startup with one person and €1. As long as the idea is good, you're welcome. So requirements which has been placed in the past with respect to capital requirements, with respect how many people, how many workplaces you're going to create, are not anymore in place.
Thank you. Mart, your country has a great initiative called e-residence. later today in the afternoon, we'll have a presentation on Estonian e-residence. Maybe you can just say a few words about this initiative.
Yes, and not only about this one. No, but first thing is that about visas. Estonia represents here also on issue of visas, Finland and Sweden. We issued last year more than 42,000 visas. People who have had experience with us, they say they get a European service. My response is, what else do you expect? About 40% of those visas issued are pro bono. It means free of charge. For students, school children, people in education, blah, blah, blah. So come and talk to us, and we are happy to help. E-residents, yes. They are big, Germany, France, UK. How can we compete with them in Europe or in other places? So we are physically, this is probably the only chance where we are more or less equal, represented by single individuals, right? In other places, we have to come up with some new ideas. So this is also the, let's say, the digital services, the internet services. It helps us to be able to compete in places where we are not able to go physically. E-residence, it means we invite people to use our state-built, society-loved internet services in order to in order to handle your business and to help Estonia grow and your own business grow. You will hear more about this later today. Visit our website of our embassy, and I could tell you 90 of Belarusians have obtained it. So it works, it's a good thing. And the last thought here about when is the right time or what is the right product. We haven't talked too much about America and this wonderful nation of entrepreneurship. A manufacturer of early 20th century, his name is Henry Ford, maybe someone has heard about him. He said, if I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said, give us faster horses. So you see, you have to come up with your own ideas and with your own inventions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Уважаемые коллеги, у нас совсем немножко времени, но я надеюсь, вы приготовили интересные вопросы и буквально несколько вопросов. We are behind the schedule, so I turn over to the audience. And, пожалуйста, подходите. Да.
Добрый день, меня зовут Татьяна Короткевич. В этом году я была кандидатом в президенты Республики Беларусь. Спасибо за эту дискуссию. У меня к вам следующий вопрос. Насколько я поняла, и для того, чтобы продвинуть наш продукт на рынке ЕС, нам нужны долгосрочные стратегии и время для того, чтобы здесь внутри в стране произошли экономические реформы, была создана среда для конкуренции, для привлечения инвесторов, а также пересмотрены вопросы государственной поддержки. И, конечно же, вопрос внутреннего развития, внутреннего потенциала, о чем говорила Татьяна, о том, что нужно понижать фактор разрыва межкультурной коммуникации и уровня. Скажите, пожалуйста, а если поговорить о краткосрочной перспективе, да, хотелось бы услышать ваши перспективы, ваши рекомендации для столь активной аудитории, которая и сегодня уже ищет рынки, сегодня ищет новые контакты и новые коммуникации. Спасибо большое.
Прошу прощения, потому что очень люди по-английски делают, что это сложно вопрос. how do you deliver longer-term change in the short term? Now, I hosted in my residence about 2 years ago an event with a certain Polish, former Polish finance minister. Doesn't matter. And they were talking a lot about shock therapy. I mean, you can do shock therapy if you've got the political will, and certainly Poland had, and I think Estonia had in 1991, 1992. But it's pretty tough, and you have to have you have to have the wish of the people to change. And I think that was the difference between countries, the big Baltic countries, as opposed to, say, Belarus and perhaps even Ukraine. I think in the short term, you start doing the things that will allow for better conditions for enterprise. And we've already talked about one of them. Reducing the levels, eliminating directed lending to state-owned enterprises so that everybody competes for capital on an equal basis so that private enterprise can flourish. Second element of this, I think, is you have to have I understand very well the President's aspirations to keep the social state, but as the Swedes will tell you, social states are very expensive. Chancellor Merkel has pointed out to all Europeans, not just to Germans, that Europe is something like 20 or 25% of the world's GDP, but has over 50%, over 60%, 60% of all welfare payments, social state, if you like. That's not going to be sustainable in the long term with an aging population and so on and so forth. So you need to have, the problem with the model here in Belarus at the moment is that basically the state-owned enterprise employs, and there is relatively low unemployment. But if you're trying to change, if you're trying to have a more flexible economy, if you have companies growing, companies declining, you need to have what they call frictional unemployment for that, so that people lose jobs, but that's, if you only lose the job, you will then go and look out for a new one. You will be able to redeploy labour from failing businesses to growing and successful businesses, and that requires a different safety net. It requires unemployment benefits. It's very boring, but it's actually really important. And in Britain, in the 20th century, it took us time to establish the safety net, but you need to have an unemployment benefit that people will be able to live off while they look for a new job. I mean, there are other things that you need to do, but I think it's a case of you can't keep companies going forever. If you are really brave, if you want to have an independent economy that survives and flourishes, you need to let companies die to allow new companies to be established and to grow. That's the sort of short-term message. I think Margaret Thatcher called it tough love, but that is really what you need if you're going to be able to transform not just this country, but every country. And I tell you, this process is continual in our countries. I think Mike's given a very good example of how there's lots of failures before you have success.
I fully agree with what Bruce said. Sometimes we differ, but in this case we don't. I think that for many years discussion has been going on within the government, between partners within the Republic of Belarus itself, and with international partners. So we don't miss the quality of analysis. What we miss is that somebody should start to promote progress in this dialogue. And when we talk by step, yes, nice, but there should be someone to take the first step. And we are just talking about steps, but we don't see steps, which makes perhaps a difference. And as long as you're waiting for a better future because there might be a more promising development, economic development in general, and you can profit and stay stable with the system you have, then you miss the boat. I will just remind you of the German example. When we were called the sick men of Europe in the beginning of this century, we undertook really hardship reforms, which cost a hell of a lot of money, but which made our economy more able to react on fluctuations on internal and global markets. This is why Germany today is in a better position than many other countries around the world, because we were taking those crucial and painful decisions. But the world continues to change, and we are, as I said a couple of days ago during the German 8th German Economic Day in Belarus, we are now discussing in Germany something which is called Industry 4+0. We are discussing how to implement the fourth industrial revolution, which will in fact bring a lot of people, the effect will be that a lot of people will lose their jobs, because we will have a production which is fully autonomous by interlinking all kinds of internet, etc., appliances, which you don't need anymore any kind of workforce. Producing cars without anybody, just one sitting behind a computer and directing all the components to be built into one car. And this is the discussion which we are starting now, to be able to compete on the world market in the future. So, if you've got a situation like it has been also described by Bruce, where, let's say, 80% of industrial production is done by state-owned companies. At the same time, the regulator is the state. Then you've got a natural conflict of interest. And the state is naturally much more interested in preserving the 80% instead of rethinking how to make this huge part of Belarusian industry more capable to be competitor in a global market which is changing every minute. So there are a couple of things which could be altered without hurting the social system at the same time. But one should start, and naturally never forget the social side of it. So you have to do things in parallel and not in phased form. If you want to reform Belarusian industry, you have to reform the social net of Belarus. And you have to do it in parallel, otherwise it won't work.
Thank you so much. Пожалуйста, вопрос.
Компания «Санетика», Минск, Беларусь. Можно говорить о том, что нужно изменить уже существующее промышленное производство, поменять предприятия, которые имеют длительную историю работы. Но в то же время я считаю, что ресурсов в мире, сфер для применения усилий и зарабатывания денег более чем достаточно. Мне очень нравится опыт Эстонии в этом плане. Они сделали электронное правительство, и мы непременно уже воспользовались вот этим сервисом. Я считаю, что, может быть, стоит повернуть взгляд в сторону поиска новых ниш, инновационных каких-то сфер, в которых можно будет, опять же, не делить уже имеющийся какой-то баланс сил, а я уверен, что можно создать некие сферы, ресурсы, которые сами по себе позволят генерить прибыль для малого бизнеса, для среднего бизнеса. Опять же, какую-то часть может занять уже существующие предприятия и бизнесы. Может быть, имеет смысл посмотреть в сторону расширения возможностей, не только изменения того, что уже существует. Я считаю, что эти процессы должны идти параллельно, но в то же время молодой бизнес смотрит в эту сторону, и, может быть, пора уже людям, которые имеют определенный опыт и возможности, тоже как-то больше усилий и времени этому уделять.
as you know, there are more questions than clever answers. I will try to say just briefly, because also I heard the previous lady, yes, Tatiana Karatkevich. I wanted to say some things, yes. Banal issues. To make an omelette, you need to break an egg, right? We know it. So how to make a cake bigger, even making the cake bigger for small and medium-sized enterprises and private entrepreneurs. So it requires that you need to break some eggs. Peter mentioned before, and I would say it was difficult to take in Estonia in the 90s as well, but how come so many reforms simultaneously? This sector, that sector, the third, the 17th, but this seems to be the truth, that you need to, changing one element doesn't change the picture. Maybe it could in one company. I wanted to bring an issue, do bankruptcies happen? They do, even in this beloved Sweden. Do you recall a company called Saab? They produce wonderful cars, right? It's gone now. So something in their business model didn't work. What a wonderful brand, and they lost the brand. So you see, it takes time to nurture it, but you could lose it as well. So it is a constant process on a daily, weekly basis. Good. Peter talked about Germany 4.0, the new phases in industry. I'm not sure. Let's say at some point we talked that everything was outsourced. Everything went to China, to Asia. Could something happen now that something gets closer to Europe? Could something happen here in Belarus? I don't know. It's one of those areas where people say you want to spread your risks and not to be too dependent on one producer or provider. Not more than.
So one thing I was thinking about, and I read a hell of a lot about it, is the general future of labor. How to define labor? We still are defining labor with an 8-hour industrial day. This is not the way we will live through the next 50 years. And also in Germany, I must say that this discussion is not as public as I would like it to be. Fortunately, we do have people who publish and think about the future of labor. We should redefine labor. If you don't redefine labor, you will end up with a situation where you still have the typical old-fashioned industrial or service labor force, which is not able to be adequately reacting to changes around the world. We should talk about social labor. We should talk about financing labor via taxes, because dignity of humankind depends to a large extent on being engaged in some kind of business. And if we don't think this discussion at the same time, it counts for Germany, it counts for Great Britain, it counts for all over the world, and it will count also for Belarus. We have to rethink the notion and the definition of what is labor and what will it mean in the future. And if we don't start now, we will be confronted with a situation where we can't cope with the situation anymore. And I would advise every government around the world to publicly discuss this item, because otherwise we will end up nowhere.
Thank you. Коллеги, последний вопрос. У нас очень мало времени.
Олег Прокопенко, экспорт-импорт. Сначала хочу сказать господину Мартинсону спасибо. Вы являетесь чиновником высокого ранга постсоветского пространства. и говорите такие слова, потом я, как вы, а теперь я хочу вам сказать, общайтесь, пожалуйста, с нашими высокими чиновниками, чтобы они поняли, что нужно признавать свои ошибки. Второе. Вашей красной нитью проходит, что Беларусь – это риски. Хочу вам сказать, народ белорусский работает 25 лет, в районе 90% только рисков. И знает, когда, куда и как. Дальше. Давайте сделаем. Беларусь не как вот здесь. Это здорово, что сказал Маринич, дальше. Стартовую площадку. Это стартап. А теперь два слова назад. Как это говорят? В историю и скажу. Было два исхода. Один был исход еврейский. Удача. Второй был исход народов Европы в Америку. Удачно. Третье. Вы посмотрите. При всем при том, за многовековую историю Великобритания под свой флаг в клуб Великобритании собрала 54 страны мира и при любом раскладе не потеряла их. Тоже удачно, правда? Немцы, которые пришли и тоже, что мы дальше, своим упорством, пунктуальностью и порядочностью тоже сказали, что у нас все удачно и признают свои ошибки. Так скажите нам, что же нам сейчас конкретно сделать, чтобы, начиная даже с того стартапа, работать? Вот поделитесь, не общее слово, а вот конкретно. Приди туда, разделим туда. Все, спасибо.
Раз он уже сказал, что делаем.
Могу я переформулировать ваш вопрос? Only one word, one sentence recommendation. Because we are very much behind the schedule. One sentence recommendation. Very short.
Don't spend your time listening to me. Go and talk to Belarusian entrepreneurs who've done it. Spend more time in this place, talk to them.
Make made in Belarus a brand which is known all over the world.
Let's have a meeting. Thank you.
Let's give a hand.